for me, this is a very, very exciting panel because, you know, we've spoken about 5G for several years on this stage, but this is the first time we've also been able to get not only a fantastic broadcaster, but a fantastic telecoms infrastructure provider and a mobile operator on stage as well. So please welcome Marco de Silva, Vodafone Group 5G and Edge Computing expert. Ian Wagdin, who many of you already know, BBC R&D Senior Technology Transfer Manager, and Thomas Hainzel, Nokia's Head of Digital Industries, Evolution and Partnerships. Welcome, guys. So I think in this session, we're definitely going to uncover more questions and loose ends than actual solid answers, but that's kind of the focus of the session as well. So let's start off first of all. I mean, there's always been, well, for several years, there's been trials of 5G technologies, but they're really hitting a tipping point now, which is why I think we've all been able to come to this event and get on stage together now. You know, it's become, there's a definite crossover. So can you tell me what each of you have been working on? Give some examples of some of the trials of 5G that you've been involved in and where this could go moving forwards for sports fans and broadcasters.
Shall I start?
Yeah, go, Michael.
From a network perspective, obviously, we want to understand the industry, so we have to be involved. Connectivity does come and acts as an enabler, and we want to fully understand, because the value chain is complex, and we want to understand where it plays a part and how it plays a part. So definitely we've been talking with broadcasters, infrastructure providers in order to create products and also understand their requirements. And their requirements are based on different use cases as well. So there's applicability there to be learned as well. And from our perspective, obviously it touches users as well, consumers. How do we make that distribution and monetization to them, to the end consumers? How do we provide new experiences? So we've been involved, obviously, in direct conversations, projects, industry organizations to also create R&D projects that demonstrate the future and obviously take the learnings from that.
Great. And Ian?
Yeah, thanks, Heather. We've been looking really, or I've been looking personally at both the contribution and production side, but also there's been some sort of distribution user cases that we've explored as well. But the focus really this year has been on that non-public network that Stephen mentioned. So we did some work with, in this country with BT around the Commonwealth Games, but we've also been working in Copenhagen with TV2 around the Tour de France. We had some other non-public networks deployed at various other large events over the summer. And for us, 5G is just an enabling technology, and it's one of a suite of technologies that we're using. So one of the key areas we've been looking at is not only just the sort of 5G connectivity side of it, but how we integrate that in with our broadcast workflows and how we move our existing sort of radio cameras or other services that are all moving to IP over to a wireless infrastructure, and 5G is a candidate technology for that IP-based wireless infrastructure. So basically anything that is IP-based, so a lot of work with 2110, a lot of work with NMOS, a lot of work with NDI and things like that that enable us to move traffic over the network, but it's the interface points that become really important to us, so we've been exploring that.
Thomas.
All right, so I would say from the Nokia side, I mean, when we talk about 5G, we talk about, of course, the public networks that are, deployed with all the operators, but we also talk a lot about the private networks, right? So private 5G networks for campuses, and we are doing that since many, many years in different industries, and I mean, manufacturing, energy, transportation are some of them, and I think the broadcasting industry is a super interesting and emerging industry for us now to get in touch or to bring in that new technology. And the 5G and the private networking. Let me mention two examples here that we are currently working on. So one is, for example, our own arena that we have in Tampere in the north of or in the middle of Finland. So it's basically a sports stadium covering 15,000 people. And we have deployed a private network there together with Elysia, which is one of the local operators there, to provide on the one hand augmented reality and virtual and immersive experiences. I think we've heard a bit about that earlier today already, but also to enable, let's say, venue and stadium and kind of campus operation, right, and help to basically operate the whole facility and operate the processes there. And a simple deployment has also, for example, been done for the recent indoor cycling championship in France, right, where we have equipped the local velodrome there close to Paris with a similar solution, right? And this is where we see this kind of campus networks and the 5G technology coming into the broadcasting and into the media industry.
Cool. And then moving into broadcasting. So what are the challenges of integrating all the different connectivity technologies that we already use in sports broadcasting, like, 5G, well, that's coming in, RF, edge computing, all those kind of things? How do they all glue together?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the big challenges we've really been looking at. And effectively, if you look at the chain of what you have to do in the broadcast environment, there's a lot of people think, oh, we'll just build a wireless studio. But actually, it doesn't really make a lot of sense to have big cameras with box lenses on connected on a wireless connection when you've got to power them, or they're not going to move. So actually, you're probably at some point going to want to integrate wireless solutions against wired solutions. And therefore, you want the wireless solutions to work in exactly the same way as your wired solutions. So therefore, you have to think about, okay, well, what is my connectivity protocol around that? And so we focused a little bit on NMOS and some of those things for discovery and registration. But the other thing we can do is we can use those same tools to speak to the networks, and therefore configure the networks in real time to give us better quality of service for certain sort of aspects that we might want. And the other thing that we don't often think about is that a wireless camera at the moment is a digital wireless camera, a COF-DM wireless camera, is unidirectional. And then we tend to bolt on a whole bunch of other radio services around that, whether that's around control, whether that's follow focus, whether that's audio, talkback, reverse vision. All of these things require separate RF. So we use a lot of spectrum just to service one camera. But by using an IP network or a 5G network, what we can do is we can use the sort of reverse part of that network in order to offer some of those services. But some of those are critical. Things like tally lights are probably not as critical, some people would argue, but you can prioritize that traffic, and therefore you can use technologies like slicing in order to sort of break that up and deliver it. So there's a whole bunch of things that you can do, and we're only just sort of scraping the surface and working with other broadcasters across Europe and other network providers like Nokia to kind of really understand what the future of some of these services will look like.
Yeah.
Definitely from the Vodafone side is understanding how the industry, as Ian said, needs fidelity, right? This needs to work, and of course our networks are designed for the mass market consumer base, and is understanding what the level of products or changes that we need to make and adapt to not only make it scalable into what the broadcasters and the media industry need, but also trustworthy, that they need to expect that it will work. And that comes from a combination of products and technologies. We talk about 5G. 5G, we consider really it's a suite of technologies, if we can say that. And obviously, I guess we'll talk a little bit, and Ian already talked a little bit, is how to make mobile private networks or a network work for a specific use case that really targets what it needs to do. And that is different from what you and I as a consumer use, and that's, in essence, say, the low-hanging fruit that we can target to also start making some use cases happen that brings agility and flexibility into what you do in terms of production or distribution or actual consumer experiences that you do today.
Sure. And how does this affect you, Thomas, on the infrastructure side?
Yeah, I would say from our side, it's really, we're talking about the confluence of technologies here, right, or different aspects of 5G. So what we have seen in the previous also deployments is there is most probably not one technology that fits all the needs that we have. Yeah, from the very early kind of creation and production process down to the distribution and to the different audiences in the media industry. So what we really see is select the technologies wisely, right? And I mean, there is a hype at the moment, a lot around 5G and a lot around putting everything wireless. But we have also seen, coming also from other industries, that sometimes there is a good reason to have a cable, right? And let's keep that, and let's use the 5G there, where the most critical use cases are, where we need mobility, where we need the latency, maybe with a mobile camera, where we need to have, like we heard in the previous panel, like flexible setups that need to be fast, right? So let's make the right choice of technologies to get everything done in the end.
Yeah, cool. And then one of the really big advantages of 5G in the future when we have a 5G core rather than the 4G is for sports broadcasters being able to spin up a slice of network or grab 5G network in a box as you did at Pitlockery Games, Ian, from Ofcom. But that obviously, because we're still some way away from being able to get a network slice, that's still there. It's kind of undefined at the moment, although you can create a private network. So what are telcos, my question is, what are telcos prepared to do to enable broadcasters to be able to spin up connectivity? I'm looking at you, Marco, when they need it. It's Thursday, oh no, I need a 5G network for, the Premier League, now.
That's the holy grail of flexibility, right, that we want to achieve. The standards are there, the capabilities are nascent, they are there. Even without, say, the full 5G spectrum of technologies deployed, there's already things that we can do, and the majority of them are actually in the most unpredictable environment, which is the radio element. So we can start tailor the experience and provide radio channels and frequencies to increase the guarantees and the quality of service for the given experience. And that's what we can start to do today. And it's already available in some countries. Some operators are more advanced than others, and we pride ourselves to actually be sort of in the front of that, to actually have some real commercial products that are starting to come to market. So that's definitely part of the conversation. And of course, it comes easier if we're doing a mobile private network. Then we have a lot more control. Because one of the things and the challenges on a macro network, what we call a macro network, a public network, is that you still have to cater for your normal users, right? When we're talking about cameras, we're talking about an order of magnitude. If you have a handful of cameras, we're talking about hundreds or if not thousands of consumers, type of traffic that will be, say, in a stadium or in a venue, right? So it's an order of magnitude that we need to adapt the technology, understand the requirements, what it needs to do, and then adapt for a specific use case and make it happen.
So I guess
the technology is there, and it's beginning more and more to actually become a commercial product and an understandable product to make it work.
Sure, because the networks aren't designed for this kind of usage.
Yeah. Not initially, yeah. No. They are now, but it takes time.
I'm going to take a slightly skeptical view, which is that I think network slicing could be a beneficial technology in the contribution workflow where perhaps you've got a news event and you want to make sure you've got priority traffic there. But for sort of planned production, I don't really see, especially where you've got high uplink, as you were touching on, the way these networks are built is balanced towards the downlink. So let's say you've got 90% downlink and 10% uplink, you're going to end up paying 10 times more than your bandwidth than you really need, because that's the way that network is designed. What we can do with private networks is we can completely shift that balance so that our uplink traffic is available to us. And people think about 5G networks as really expensive things because they think about them as kind of national infrastructure type things. But the reality is a network in a box will cost you less than a lens. We're quite used to spending 50 grand on a lens, but I can buy a network in a box solution for that from a not from a Nokia, but from that. And the other thing is we're bloody difficult customers because we understand RF, we understand spectrum, we've got a relationship with the regulators that probably no other industry has. Which means that if I'm in a hospital or a factory and I want to build a network, then I would go to Vodafone because they're the experts in that space. But there are probably people in this room who know far more about RF than I ever will. Actually, these skills are transferable. And it's the same as we move from analog to digital and digital to IP. It's just a different kind of RF. And once you get your head around how that works, and once you can configure that network, then we already have the skills in our industry and able to do it. And that's reflected because we've been able to move so fast in this space, where other industries perhaps are still waiting for some of the telcos to deliver against the promises.
Yeah, I think, just to add, I would say both networks, like talking about public and private networks, right? They have their super right to exist, and I think the convergence or the complementary aspect of them is pretty important when we talk about connecting, let's say, for example, the visitors, connecting thousands of people to a public network, which is super easy, which is fast via the mobiles that they anyhow have. Yeah, I don't want to bother you with the technical details now, but there are some aspects that you need to take into account when talking about then then private networks, where you, for example, then have special SIM cards, where you have special authentication mechanisms that make these networks super high secure, they make them super high performance, so broadcasters can ensure, and media companies, that just the devices they want to have are operating in that network, are operating in that frequency, right? Which is, I think, the super asset that we have with those private networks. And on the other hand, the public networks provide those easy access kind of thing, yeah, that we need to make the experience seamless and to make the compatibility easy when we talk about the different devices that we have. And by the way, that's also one of the topics, I think we discussed it upfront a bit, that especially the device compatibility and the availability of devices, that is also one of the challenges that we see at the moment, not only in the broadcast and in the media industry, but also across other industries, where we are working hard with the device vendors and the module vendors to make many different types, from cameras to sensors to asset trackers, to make them compatible with 5G networks, public as well as private, to get those use cases going. So that's at least the focus that we have also as a Nokia at the moment, to, let's say, enlarge this ecosystem and to really help and support the whole ecosystem of devices and solutions and applications here, because that in the end makes the network nice. I always like to say 5G and private networks as such is not sexy, but the use case is making it visible and tangible for the end customer.
Sure, good. And then following on from that, how do we move to this next stage of the vision? I mean, I've got a metaverse panel in a sort of like an hour or so, but yeah, so that's kind of where it's going. But how do telcos understand what broadcasters want, and vice versa? Do we really understand each other at this point?
Well, that's why we talk to one another. We like to think that we understand each other, but there's definitely a lot to learn still. I think it's not just the broadcaster, there's a lot of players in the value chain. Of course, from a production, distribution, and consumption, and whatever you want to do in between in terms of actually enhancing experience or not, or new things that you want to create, or you want to create new content, or you envision in a new way, there's plenty to learn, and that's why we're involved in the industry. It's not going to happen today or tomorrow, but I think that's why we need to still be involved in creation of the future. And I think a lot of the new things will come from broadcasters, like in a way that they want to cover an event or cover sport. What new ways, tracking a ball, all these technologies that are also coming into sports, they will need to feed in slowly into what that means from a production side, a capture, and then how to tell that story and how to make it visible and available to consumers. And all of that will come from to being connected somewhere. And then how that pipeline works, make it realizable and real time, then it will generate added value to the consumer or to the experience that you want to put in front of the customers, in my view.
I think there's a couple of things here. So one thing, we need to be less blinkered on just looking at what we do in our industry and look slightly wider. So I was involved in the standards work that we did about 2 or 3 years ago, which will feed into the next set of releases. And very quickly, it becomes very apparent that there are technologies that are built in there that we could make use of, whether that's around timing and synchronization, around automation and factory robotics. There's not a lot of difference between a robotic arm in a factory and a robotic camera arm. Medical there's parallels between what we do in medical, and we know that because if you look at the camera manufacturers, they make a camera and they paint it white for the medical guys and they paint it black for us, and they charge the medical guys 5 times as much as they do for us. But the workflows that they want in terms of latency and in terms of image quality and in terms of that, and the conversation I've had with some of the medical guys when they're saying, I want 8K uncompressed at 200 frames a second, well, I'm saying, actually, I only need compressed 4K at 200 megabits per second. But if you want uncompressed 8K and you're operating on my heart, you can have that, So sometimes there's stuff that's already there that we just need to be better at adopting into our industry and taking that. And I think we have got better as an industry at doing that in the past 10 or so years. But we need to sort of keep half an eye on the sort of journey that other industries are on, and take the best practice from there sometimes and adopt them.
Sure. And then looking at fans, so how do we actually enable the fan experience? Because we're talking about different layers of networking and infrastructure and broadcast, and then you've got the fan at the end with their smartphone, sat in a stadium or sitting at home playing with stuff. And this AR, live data, overlays, and the monetization required to fund all this, which is obviously very important, especially from your end as well, and sports rights. Once we have the 5G network in place, how do we get all those different stages linked together so the fan actually gets what they want?
Shall I start? Yeah. I think it goes back to what I said at the beginning. 5G is an enabler, right? In order to capture the data and make it accessible for the systems to actually operate and integrate to create the experience for end users. We're talking about, say, even the sessions before and that we had, they were amazing because we were talking about AR and how the data was visible and how we were applying that and making customer facing and how the customer could have interactivity with it to choose what they want. And that's precisely where we are moving, right? So that data needs to be captured, and it needs to be captured in a live environment. It's no longer a sort of offline mid-term or half-term of the sport that is then showcased. It's about that option that needs to be presented to the users. So everything needs to be part of a pipeline that actually gets accessible and that gets to work together. And all these systems may need to integrate with one another so that data is available, right? A huge, say, use case I guess, in your industry is betting, or what is available in terms from a broadcasting and also what's happening on the ground that then is accessible, in real time, that order what's happening. And the same can be said with advertisement, live advertisement, changes in advertisement from different geographies of what you want to do. And I don't forget, from the Vodafone side, we're also keen to explore the future of sport. Sport is not purely physical, or it's a combination of the physical and added elements, such as we had AR talked about today, but also what is esports or gaming, or a combination of both that actually all come together to provide new experiences. And yeah, it's not an easy environment, so to speak, but from our point of view, it's how we can do and use connectivity to actually enhance the ecosystem and at the end of the day provide a great experience for end consumers.
Great.
I think it goes back to what you were saying earlier about it being a suite of technologies, and certain bits of that suite of technologies will be more applicable to the production versus the fan experience. Much is said about edge compute. I bet if we asked every single person in here what they think about edge compute, we'd probably get a slightly different definition from a whole bunch of people. But actually, some of those services are probably better suited to sort of large-scale fan experiences where you've got to do a lot of rendering sort of close to where those devices are, where you've got extremely low latency requirements. Perhaps on the production side, there's less value in there because the trade-off of the cost versus the benefits, it just doesn't stack up as much. There may be use cases where it does, but I don't know, we're still exploring them. But the reality is that it's not going to be one size fits all. But I do think there are elements of that. And we've got to remember we can super serve fans who are in a stadium, but then we've got the fans who are at home, and then we've got the fans who are in their cars, and then we've got the fans who are just want to pop in and see some highlights and stuff like that. So there's a whole sort of, I'm going to use the spectrum word, but there's a whole continuance of different experiences that we want to create, and all of those will require slightly different architectures. And the beauty of 5G is that there are different architectures that can serve those different purposes.
Sure. Thomas?
Yeah, and I think just to add to what Marcus said earlier on the ecosystem side, I think that's the important part here when we talk about bringing this experience to the fan, right? To understand, okay, where are the different players, what are the different needs, and how can we leverage the technologies best across the different stakeholders, right? And I'm just picking the example here when we talk about, for example, providing AR, as you mentioned it as a use case, an AR kind of experience to VIP visitors, to some launches, to some screens, that is on the campus. That is on site, so we can use again a private network or a different technology and also a different kind of software and server and edge computing piece than what we use when we want to bring the experience to the visitors staying at home, right? And then we also need to think about how to maybe top up that one with other either monetization points, but also other experiences which are maybe not just the broadcasting part, but also some other interaction gamification thing, which is then another arm that what connects to that. And I think that's why it's important to look at 5G as the technology enabler behind it. And I mean, we as a Nokia, we are super happy to work on that technology enabler to enable, let's say, for the broadcasters as well as for the telcos, this kind of experience for their customers, because I think in the end the customer will let's say subscribe to those services that in the end leverage the different technologies in the back.
Fab. And Marco?
And if you allow, me just to step in, because I think Ian brought a great point. I've talked about the 5G suite of technologies rather than talking about individual technologies, precisely because I think for several for several players in the industry, it means different things on the capability that it can enable through the technology, right? When we talk about edge computing or the cloud computing, what that environment can actually provide, it's great to understand what it can actually benefit you if a lot of the players are resident in the cloud to make the whole pipeline actually speed up. And by speeding that up, you can actually then open up the opportunities that you can make to consumers, and be that at the stadium live or if they are anywhere. And sometimes that's the enabler, and that's part of the learnings that we found, is that synchronization is key in its one element for given experiences. Not only from a technological side in terms of production and capture, that's also key for Ian, but actually in the enablement of the experience of the data that you have, right? If you are trying to provide a new experience or data to be visible to the end consumer, if any given part of it comes late or is not available, it may break the immersion, right? And that's why, at least from that we are not expecting from the Vodafone side, we're thinking about the big producers and content owners as being the key for that, but actually the value chain is complex and there's a lot of elements, and there's a lot that each company can actually do from a specialized component that can value from our technology, and that has been quite a big learning, and it's really great to see that not only with 5G, but with edge computing or cloud computing integrated with the network that actually makes it available, it actually can bring quite a lot of value.
Brilliant. And then finally, we've got a telco, an infrastructure provider, a broadcaster on stage here. How do you see the share, we've kind of touched on various things here, but how do you see the share of responsibilities and the partnership between all of you working going forward, to deliver this future of sports broadcasting? And importantly, who will own the customer?
Do you want to start?
We'll own the customer. Well, but I think you've got to define who the customer is, really, because there are, as we've already said, I think there's the business-to-business market, the production side of stuff, and then you've got the business-to-consumer market, which is the kind of serving the audiences. So in that business-to-business relationship, we are the customer. And we'll want those services. Now, we will either, depending on the scale of what we're doing, we will either self-provide those services, as we do now in certain things, or we will buy them in from a supplier like Vodafone or BT Media and Broadcast or whatever, depending on the scale and the usual business decisions we make day in, day out on how we set our operational levels. When you talk about the audiences as the consumer, the customer, well, actually, they're really important to us because we want to be supplying those services, and there'll be branding and all of that on there. But increasingly, we're seeing, those are EE customers or Vodafone customers or O2 customers who also have that there. So the thing for us is there shouldn't be a barrier for entry. All right, so from the BBC perspective, we're very keen that there isn't another third-party gatekeeper in the way that's sort of saying, actually, you're Vodafone, therefore you get a better BBC service than if you're on O2 and stuff like that. And I know there are sort of net neutrality conversations and things going on about that, but for us, actually, we see them as our audience, and therefore we want that direct through. So we want to still maintain that relationship with our audience, but we absolutely recognise in the same way that we've got ISP conversations, we'll have the same with the telcos. But quality of service is key here as well, because if you're watching a stream and it's breaking up, you probably, are you going to blame us, or are you going to blame Vodafone, or are you going to blame Nokia because there's a breakdown? So we need to really understand how these chains connect together, and all of that is all about partnerships.
Yeah, and I think from our side, and I mean, Mark and I discussed a bit upfront, of course, also on that topic, how we play together. And I think the importance for us is, as you said, to understand what are the requirements. And they are, in the broadcasting industry, they are different. And I can tell you also, if you look into other industries, right, I've worked across of them, and basically you see very specific requirements in the different industries. And for example, in manufacturing, we talk about protocols that need to be covered in that particular connectivities, yeah, where here we talk about more uplink, as we heard, right, that we need for broadcasting. And I think we need to bring those requirements to the table so that on the one hand, standardization, which is an important topic if you talk about mobile networks, but also when it comes to R&D and producing the radio and the core technology, meaning the networking components, that we can consider those, yeah, and bring these solutions to life. And on the one hand, offer something on the one hand to the telco operators that they then can leverage and use in their network, right? But on the other hand, also complement what might not work, like because a public network is configured and set up in a different way than what might be needed on a campus. And that's something that we are luckily kind of discussing here as a telco and as a telco vendor, let's say, because complementary, I think we can meet those requirements that are there today, but that will also come up in the future. But Marco, maybe.
Absolutely. I think the relationship commercially, right, will exist. You will make products that we will also make products with a different added value on top and to provide to broadcasters and the general industry. The consumer story, I hear you, Ian, right, is key. Whoever fronts that customer. I think from a Vodafone side, or from a telco side rather, I think it has been approached earlier on today as well. There's other level of partnerships, but that's more in activation or consumer reach or brands and everything that you can attach to the experience. But actually, I think commercially, you know, who is the content distributor or owner will likely face the customer, right? There's a conversation if we want to make specific content available, right? But again, that's partnerships or activations or other kind of elements. And in the answers, you know, there will be commercial relationships to establish that.
I think what we're saying is a really complex value chain because we've spoken about our perspectives, but then you've got the rights holders' perspectives in there. You've got, as we've seen earlier, we've got emerging platforms perspectives in there, and then we've got, you know, God knows what's going to happen with you know, in the future as this stuff moves forward. There's a lot of people who will want a slice of that cake, and we've got to work out how to make that work.
I feel we will continue this conversation in depth in 2023 and maybe beyond. Fantastic. Thank you very much for all of my speakers, and give them a round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you.